When I was 7 years old, my grandmother in Taipei stood at her kitchen door on a Wednesday afternoon in the summer of 1960 and watched our neighbor, Mrs. Lin, walk past with a bucket of water from the well at the end of Yonglei Street. And she said something to my mother in Hokkien that I did not understand at the time. I understand it now. 2 days later, Friday morning, Mrs. Lin was found on her kitchen floor, paralyzed on the right side of her body. She survived, barely. She lived another 12 years with one functional hand and a face that no longer smiled symmetrically. And what my ama had said on Wednesday, watching the bucket, was this: "The wind is moving in her head. Take her to the doctor today." The family had laughed. Mrs. Lin had laughed. She said she was tired. She said she had slept on her arm wrong. She said the rice in the pot still tasted right, and the children still came home for dinner. And then it was Friday morning, and the world had changed for her forever. And here is the part I want you to hold loosely in your mind for the next 25 minutes. My grandmother was not a doctor. She did not know the words middle cerebral artery or transient ischemic attack or the acronym FAST that the American Stroke Association would not publish until 1998. She knew faces. She knew the way a person carried a bucket. She knew when the wind was moving in someone's head. And the paper I read last spring, Johnston, UCSF, 2007, The Lancet, confirms exactly what my ama saw on that Wednesday afternoon, 60 years ago. Most people who have a major ischemic stroke had a small warning stroke in the days before it, and almost half of those warnings happen within 48 hours of the big one. 48 hours. The window my grandmother knew about and the family threw away. I want to walk you through 3 silent signs today. 3 things that show up in the 24 to 72 hours before a stroke, and that almost everybody, patients, families, even the person experiencing them, attributes to, "I'm just tired." 3 signs my grandmother named on a Wednesday in 1960 without ever attending a medical school. Before I go further, I want to say this clearly. Stroke is a neurological emergency. The information in this video is educational. It is based on published research and on 40 years of bedside observation and on what I watched in a Taiwanese kitchen as a child. If you are watching this for yourself or for someone you love, and you see what I am about to describe, the action is not to come back to this video for the protocol. The action is to call 911. Time in stroke is brain. Every minute of delay loses about 1.9 million neurons. I will repeat that at the end of this video, and I will not apologize for repeating it. I worked the cardiology floor at Kaiser Oakland between 1981 and 2023. 40 years. Some Friday mornings, I would be pulled to neuro overflow because the stroke service was full. And there was a pattern across those 4 decades that I want to share with you. The Friday morning admissions, the catastrophic strokes, almost always came with a family member in the waiting room saying the same sentence. She seemed off Wednesday. Wednesday. The water bucket. My grandmother knew. Let me tell you who I am, since we have not met before. My name is Mei Hua Tao, Min to almost everybody, and I was a registered nurse for 40 years. Most of those years on the cardiology floor at Kaiser, Oakland, with frequent rotations through the neurological service. I retired in 2023. Before nursing school at UCSF, I grew up in Datong neighborhood in Taipei, in a kitchen where my mother's mother, my Ma, was the woman the neighborhood went to before they went to the doctor. Not because there were no doctors, there were, but because Ma watched faces, and she watched hands, and she watched the way a person carried a bucket. And on certain mornings, Ma sent the family to the hospital, and on certain other mornings, she did not. And in 50-some years of watching her watch, I never saw her send the wrong person. So that is the credential. 40 years at the bedside, 65 years in a Taiwanese kitchen. 2 traditions, same body. The wind moving in someone's head was always real. Let me give you the science before I give you the 3 signs, because the science is what tells you why my grandmother's observation worked. Inside your skull, there is a network of arteries that branch and rebranch like the irrigation channels in the rice paddies outside Taipei. Each branch feeds a small territory of brain tissue. Brain tissue is the most metabolically demanding tissue in the human body. It consumes oxygen at a rate that no other organ matches. When a branch is interrupted, even briefly, the territory it feeds goes silent. The function that lives in that territory, moving the right hand, finding the word for rice, balancing while you walk, goes silent with it. Now here is the part that took medicine a long time to understand. Sometimes a small clot or a small piece of plaque travels from the heart or from the carotid artery in the neck, lodges briefly in one of those branches, blocks the flow for a minute or two, and then dissolves, or shifts, or moves further along and disperses. The territory wakes back up. The hand works again. The word comes back. The person says, that was strange, and they go on with their day. That brief interruption has a name. Transient ischemic attack, TIA, sometimes called a mini-stroke, though that name does the condition a disservice because it makes it sound minor. It is not minor. It is the body announcing that the same vessel is about to fail. The clot dissolved this time. The plaque is still there. The vessel is still narrowed. And usually within hours to days, often within the same week, the same vessel reoccludes and does not let go. The Johnston paper from 2007, UCSF, 4,809 patients, 4 cohorts pooled, established what specialists now treat as foundational. Roughly 10.5% of patients with a documented TIA have a major ischemic stroke within 90 days. And nearly half of those strokes happen within 48 hours of the warning event. Half. Within 2 days. Translation in plain terms. When you have a small, transient, mysterious, "that was weird" symptom that resolves on its own, you are not safe. You are in a 48-hour window where the chance of catastrophe is at its peak. And the window starts the moment the strange thing happened, not the moment you decide to take it seriously. The Oxford Vascular Study, Rothwell and team, 2005, 91,000 person-years of data. Same conclusion. 23% of strokes are preceded by a TIA. Most of those warnings are missed. And here is the most important number in this entire video, so I want you to write it down or remember it. When patients receive urgent intervention within 48 hours of a TIA, 90-day stroke risk drops by approximately 80%. 80%. The cost of that risk reduction is one ER visit, one night of inconvenience. The price of not paying that cost is a lifetime in a wheelchair, or worse. So now let me tell you the 3 signs, the 3 things that look like nothing. The 3 things my grandmother named on Yongle Street in 1960. The first sign is transient unilateral hand weakness or clumsiness. You are doing something ordinary, pouring tea, buttoning a shirt, carrying a grocery bag, and for 30 seconds or 2 minutes or 8 minutes, the hand on one side does not work right. It is clumsy. It drops the teacup. The buttons slip. The bag tips out of your fingers and you catch it with the other hand. And then it passes. And you say, "I must have slept on it wrong," or "my carpal tunnel is acting up," or "I'm just tired." The mechanism is a brief occlusion of a small branch of the middle cerebral artery, the major vessel that supplies the part of your motor cortex controlling the arm and hand on the opposite side of your body. The clot lodges. The motor cortex goes quiet for 30 seconds. Your hand fumbles. The clot dissolves. The motor cortex wakes up. You think nothing of it. But here is what my grandmother saw on Yongle Street that Wednesday. Mrs. Lin was carrying the water bucket, and every few steps her left hand let go. Just for a second. The bucket would dip, and Mrs. Lin would catch it with the right. Amma watched her do that 3 times between the well and the front door of her house. 3 times in 50 meters. Amma did not see tired. She saw a hand that was no longer reliable. And she said, "The wind is in her left side." If you watch yourself carry the laundry basket up the stairs and your right hand suddenly cannot grip the rim for a beat, even 1 beat, even briefly, that is not nothing. If your husband drops the spoon at breakfast and stares at it for a second, like he doesn't recognize the connection between his hand and the spoon, that is not nothing. If you reach for your reading glasses and your fingers fail to close around them, and then 10 seconds later they work fine, that is not nothing. That is sign 1. The second sign is a brief speech word finding hesitation. You are mid-sentence talking to your daughter on the phone, and the word for refrigerator or rice or Tuesday is gone. Not gone like you forgot, Gone like the word is on the tip of your tongue and the tongue cannot find it for 15 seconds. Or you slur a single syllable mid-sentence, just one, and your daughter says, "Mum, are you okay?" And you say, "Of course I'm okay, I'm just tired." The mechanism is transient ischemia of Broca's area, the region of the left frontal lobe that organizes the production of speech. A small embolic event in a left middle cerebral artery branch shuts down the speech production region for 15 seconds, or 30, or 2 minutes. The word will not come. Then circulation returns and the word is there. You laugh it off. You hang up the phone. You put down the receiver and forget it ever happened. Here is what my grandmother saw on Wednesday afternoon. Mrs. Lynn came to the kitchen door to ask about a rice pot that a ma had loaned her the week before. And mid-sentence, Mrs. Lynn paused. The word for rice, bi in Hokkien, a word she had said 10,000 times a year for 50 years, was gone. She stood there for maybe 20 seconds, opening and closing her mouth around an absence. And then the word came back, and she finished the sentence, and she laughed and said in Hokkien, "I'm getting old. My mind is slow today." And Ama smiled at her gently and walked her back to the door. And the moment Mrs. Lynn was out of earshot, Ama turned to my mother and said, "Take her to the doctor today." It is rarely the wrong word. It is the missing word. It is the visible pause where the brain is searching and not finding. Tip of the tongue happens to all of us as we age. That is real. That is normal. What is not normal is a sudden, sustained, mid-sentence stall on a word the person uses every single day, a word that lives in their bones, the word for water, the word for the grandchild's name, the word for the city they grew up in. If you notice this in yourself or in someone you love, and especially if it happens together with the hand clumsiness from sign 1, you are not in tired territory anymore. You are in TIA territory. And the third sign, the one that gets missed the most often because it does not look like a stroke to anybody, is a sudden unexplained vertigo with nausea, often accompanied by an unusual neck stiffness. You are sitting at the kitchen table, peeling a sweet potato, and the room starts to spin. Not lightheaded, spinning, like the kitchen is rotating around you, and the nausea comes up fast. And you grip the edge of the table and you wait, and within 5 minutes or 20 minutes, it passes. And your neck feels stiff in a way it did not feel an hour ago. And you say, "I must have an inner ear thing," or "My blood pressure is acting up," or "I stood up too fast." The mechanism here is different from the first two. The first two signs come from the front circulation of the brain, the carotid arteries on either side of your neck, and the middle cerebral arteries. This third sign comes from the back circulation, the vertebrobasilar system, the vessels that climb up the back of your neck through the spine and feed the brainstem and cerebellum. A brief ischemic event in the brainstem or cerebellum produces room-spinning vertigo, nausea, and sometimes a stiffness or pain in the neck because the vessel itself runs through the cervical spine. The Kim Fullerton Johnston paper from Neurology 2011 1,666 emergency department dizziness patients found that isolated dizziness alone was rarely stroke. But dizziness plus nausea plus neck stiffness plus sometimes a brief flash of double vision, that combination raised the stroke odds to 12.5%, 1 in 8. Here is what Amma noticed about Mrs. Lin that Wednesday afternoon. After the rice pot conversation, Amma walked Mrs. Lin to the door, and Mrs. Lin paused on the threshold and held the door frame with both hands and stood very still. Her eyes were wide. Her neck was held rigidly, like she was afraid to turn it. And she said in Hokkien, "Amma, the world is moving wrong." And then 30 seconds passed, and Mrs. Lin shook her head and laughed and said, "I am fine. I just stood up too fast." And Amma's hand on Mrs. Lin's elbow tightened, and she said again, for the second time in 5 minutes, "Take her to the doctor today." 3 signs in one Wednesday afternoon: the hand on the bucket, the missing word for rice, the door frame and the rigid neck. My grandmother saw all 3. The family heard "today" twice and laughed twice. And on Friday morning, Mrs. Lin was on the kitchen floor. I want to come back to something I said earlier. I want to plant a term and walk past it and come back to it. The term is FAST. F-A-S-T. F for face, A for arms, S for speech, T for time. The American Heart Association published this acronym for laypeople in 1998, and the Powers paper in Stroke in 2019 confirmed that when laypeople apply FAST, they correctly identify approximately 89% of ischemic strokes. Face. Ask the person to smile. Does one side of the smile droop, or does the whole face move together? Arms. Ask the person to raise both arms straight in front of them and hold them there for 10 seconds. Does one arm drift downward? Speech. Ask them to repeat a simple sentence. The sky is blue today. And listen for slurring, or for the wrong word, or for the missing word, or for any halting that does not sound like them. Time. If any of those 3 are present, even if you are unsure, even if the person is insisting they are fine, even if it is 2 in the morning and you do not want to be a bother, call 911. Note the time the symptoms started, because that time determines whether they qualify for tissue plasminogen activator, TPA, the clot-busting medication that has a 4.5-hour window from symptom onset. Door-to-needle time of less than 60 minutes reduces 3-month disability by 30%. Door-to-needle time of 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, the benefit drops at every step. Time is brain. Now here is what FAST does not capture, and this is the part where my grandmother and the modern stroke neurologist start to overlap. FAST is for the moment the stroke is happening or has just happened. It is for the bystander to act on. It does not capture the warning. It does not capture the day before. It does not capture Wednesday afternoon. For Wednesday afternoon, you need the 3 signs I just walked through: the transient hand, the transient word, the transient vertigo with neck stiffness. Each one alone is a yellow flag. 2 together is a red flag. 3 is the flag my grandmother saw on Mrs. Lynn, and the flag the family ignored. I want to be careful with how I phrase this next part. I am about to be more specific than the published guidelines are. Take this as a retired nurse's opinion, not as a clinical guideline. If you experience any one of the 3 transient signs and the symptom resolves completely, you have approximately a 48-hour window in which the chance of a major stroke is highest. The right action, even if you feel completely fine now, is the emergency department. Not your primary care doctor's office on Monday. Not, let's see how I feel tomorrow. Not a phone call to your daughter to ask what she thinks. The emergency department, the same day, ideally within hours. They will image your brain, image your carotid arteries, run an EKG, check for atrial fibrillation, possibly start you on aspirin or another antiplatelet, possibly admit you for observation. None of that happens at home. None of that can be assessed in retrospect. And the 80% reduction in 90-day stroke risk that comes from urgent evaluation only happens if the evaluation actually occurs in the window. Honestly, when I first read the Johnston paper at the end of my career, I sat in my kitchen for an hour because I had watched 20 or 30 Friday morning catastrophic strokes come in across 40 years, and the families were always saying the same thing on Wednesday. And we, the medical system, had not built a clear public-facing message that said, Wednesday matters. Wednesday is the appointment. We had built fast, which is brilliant for the moment of crisis. We had not built a public language for the warning. My grandmother had a public language for the warning in 1960. She just used Hokkien and a metaphor about wind. For those of you watching because of someone you love, a parent, a spouse, an aunt, the woman down the hall, the next 90 seconds are especially for you. The cultural difficulty of getting an aging Asian American parent to a Western emergency room is real. I know it. I have seen the daughter standing in the kitchen pleading with the mother who is insisting she is fine, that the doctor will charge too much, that the hospital is for younger people, that it is not a big deal, that her own mother had the same dizziness and was fine. I have seen this conversation. I have had this conversation. The mother who taught you how to cook rice does not want to be wheeled into an emergency room on a Wednesday afternoon for a symptom she thinks is nothing. If your loved one had a transient hand episode, or a transient word loss episode, or a transient vertigo with neck stiffness, I want you to call 911. Not the parent, you. Call 911 and let the paramedics make the case. Paramedics are very good at making the case. Their authority lands differently than yours. They will not embarrass your mother. They will assess her gently. And if she is fine, the paramedics will tell you she is fine, and the world will continue. And if she is not fine, the paramedics will be the reason your mother walks out of the hospital next week, instead of being moved to a long-term care facility for the rest of her life. And before I keep going, I want to repeat the medical disclaimer because the topic warrants it. Stroke is a neurological emergency. I am a retired nurse. I am not your physician. The information in this video is research-anchored and ancestrally anchored education. For any actionable decision involving stroke risk or stroke symptoms, the right step is the emergency department or your physician, not this video. Let me come back to my grandmother for a moment, because I want to close the loop on Mrs. Lin. Mrs. Lin survived. She lived another 12 years. She lost the use of her right hand permanently, lost the symmetry of her smile, lost the easy fluency she had with Hokkien. The language she had grown up speaking became laboured, and lost the ability to walk to the well at the end of Yongle Street. She kept selling sesame buns, but Amma would carry her tray for her in the morning. And every time Amma passed our kitchen door with that tray, she would stop and say to my mother in Hokkien the same thing. Wednesday. We knew on Wednesday. Amma did not say it bitterly. She said it the way an experienced nurse says a fact. Wednesday. We knew on Wednesday. The system was there to be used. The family chose not to use it, and the cost of that choice walked past our kitchen window every morning carrying half a tray of sesame buns. I do not want that to be your Wednesday. I do not want that to be your husband's Wednesday, or your mother's Wednesday, or yours. 3 signs: transient hand clumsiness, transient word loss, transient vertigo with nausea and neck stiffness. Any one of them alone, even if it resolves completely, even if you feel fine now, even if you are the one who is fine and you are sure about it, go to the emergency department. Within hours. Same day. The 48-hour window is real, and it is short, and it does not care about your feelings about being a bother. I want to say one more thing about what you can do right now, today, that does not require an emergency. Most TIAs and most ischemic strokes happen in arteries that have been narrowing slowly for 15 or 20 years. The plaque does not show up on a Wednesday. It has been building since you were 45. The food that prevents and slows that buildup is on this channel and on many other channels. And I will not turn this video into a food video. But the simplest single thing the Loma Linda Asian Adventist data and the Bama County longevity data and the Okinawan centenarian data all converge on is the following. Eat the way your grandmother ate, the way your grandmother's grandmother ate. Vegetables in volume. Fish 2 or 3 times a week. Fermented foods most days. Miso, kimchi, natto, fermented black beans. Whole grains. Beans and legumes. Sweet potato. Green tea. Less processed sugar than you are eating now. Less industrial seed oil than you are eating now. Less alcohol than you are drinking now. The Adventist Loma Linda women, many Asian heritage, live an average of 10 healthy years longer than the rest of California, and the dominant variable in those studies is what was on the dinner plate 3 times a day for 40 years. That is the slow work. The years before the Wednesday. The food that keeps the artery wide and the plaque from building. But on the Wednesday itself, when the hand fumbled, or the word disappeared, or the room spun, the slow work is over. The action is the phone. 911. Note the time. Let the paramedics in. I want to share 3 more bedside observations from 40 years at Kaiser, Oakland, because patterns matter more than any single case, and these 3 patterns kept showing up across decades. The first pattern. Most catastrophic strokes that arrived on my floor on Friday mornings had a transient symptom on Wednesday or Thursday. Most, not some, most. And in almost every case, when I sat with the family in the waiting room, and a cardiology nurse spends a lot of time in waiting rooms, the family member would describe the warning event in detail without realizing it had been a warning. They would say things like, "Wednesday she dropped a coffee cup and laughed about it," or "Thursday morning he had to stop in the middle of saying grace because he forgot the next word," or "She told me Wednesday afternoon the kitchen was spinning, but she sat down and it passed." Every single one of those is a TIA. Every single one was the announcement. The second pattern. Patients who came directly to the emergency department after a transient symptom, even if the symptom had completely resolved by the time they walked through the door, had dramatically better outcomes than patients who came in after the second event. This was visible at the bedside long before Johnston published the formal data. The patients who came in on Wednesday for, "I don't know, I just feel like something happened earlier today. My hand was strange for a minute," those patients walked out. The patients who came in Friday after collapsing on the kitchen floor, those patients did not walk out the same way they had walked in, if they walked out at all. The intervention window matters. The third pattern. The sentence I heard most often in the waiting room across 40 years was this: "We almost called the ambulance Wednesday, but she said she was fine." That sentence, "almost called," is the most expensive sentence in stroke care. The instinct was right. The instinct was the spouse, or the daughter, or the son, recognizing that something was off. The mistake was deferring to the patient's reassurance instead of trusting the instinct. Patients in the warning window are very bad reporters of their own state because their brain, the organ doing the reporting, is the organ that is intermittently underperfused. The brain is judging itself. It will judge itself fine. It will be wrong. My grandmother had a different system for this in Datong, and I want to describe it for a moment because it speaks to what families can do today. Amma did not negotiate with the patient about whether to seek help. Amma would walk to the family's house, take the affected person by the elbow, and walk them, sometimes physically, to the doctor's clinic at the end of the block, talking to them gently the entire way about the rice harvest, or the children, or the price of fish. By the time the conversation ended, they were at the doctor's door. The patient was never given the opportunity to refuse. Amma never asked. She decided. And in the cultural register of 1960s Taiwan, an elder woman taking your elbow and walking you to the doctor was not negotiable. Most American families do not have an Amma figure. Most American families have a daughter on the phone in California while the parent is in Florida or Ohio or New York. The phone call cannot take the elbow. The phone call can call 911. That is the modern equivalent of Amma taking the elbow. Use it. I want to come back briefly to one more thing my grandmother saw on Wednesday afternoon, because I left it out earlier, and I want to give you the complete inventory in case it shows up in your kitchen one day. When Mrs. Lynn paused at the doorframe with her stiff neck, Amma noticed something else that Amma had been tracking for 40 years before 1960. Mrs. Lynn's left eye, just for a second, drifted independently of the right. Just for a second. The kind of micro-event you would not notice unless you had been watching faces for half a century. Amma had. She watched it happen, and she added that to the list. A transient, brief double vision, sometimes called diplopia, or a transient flash of darkness in one eye that lasts a few seconds and then clears, called amaurosis fugax, are warning signs that the carotid artery on one side may have a clot threatening to dislodge. The Pooler and Kwan paper in Stroke, 2017, found that amaurosis fugax carries about a 2% annual stroke risk and is associated with significant carotid stenosis in roughly 40% of cases. If you have ever had a moment where one eye briefly went dark, like a curtain pulled down for 10 seconds and then pulled back up, that is not migraine and it is not eye fatigue. That is the carotid talking. ER, same day. Carotid ultrasound is the next step. Now, the 3 signs in the title of this video are the 3 most common warnings. The transient hand, the transient word, the transient vertigo with neck stiffness. Those are the 3 to remember. The double vision and the curtain in one eye are bonus signs, less common, equally serious, equally requiring an emergency department visit. I cared for one patient at Kaiser, late 90s, a Korean-American grandmother in her late 70s, who had 4 separate transient episodes over 5 days before her catastrophic stroke. 3 different family members witnessed 3 different events. Nobody put the pieces together. The grandmother had a transient hand episode on Saturday at a family barbecue, and her son said, "Mum is just tired from cooking." She had a transient word loss on Sunday at church, and her daughter-in-law said, "Mum is just tired from the barbecue." She had a transient dizzy spell on Tuesday at the grocery store, and her husband said she just stood up too fast in the cold foods aisle. She had a transient curtain over her left eye on Wednesday morning brushing her teeth, and she did not tell anyone because, as she said later when she could speak again, "I did not want to bother anybody." On Thursday afternoon, she had her stroke at the kitchen sink. She survived. She did not recover the use of her right hand or the fluency of her English, and every single member of her family came up to the hospital chapel on Friday and said, "We saw it. We saw it 4 times. We did not know what we were seeing." I tell that story not to make anybody feel guilty. I tell it because the family did not have the language. They had not been taught the 3 signs. The American Heart Association had not created a public-facing acronym for warning signs the way they had for active strokes. So the family was not stupid. The family was uneducated about a specific window, and by the time they were in the chapel, the education had cost the grandmother the use of her dominant hand for the rest of her life. I am giving you the language now, the hand, the word, the vertigo. plus the bonus 2, the double vision and the curtain. 5 signs total, 3 primary. That is the language. Use it. There is one more thing I want to flag, and then I am going to bring this video to a close. The signs I have described do not always look exactly the way I have described them. Sometimes the hand clumsiness is a foot clumsiness, a sudden brief inability to lift the toes when walking, the foot scuffing the floor for 2 steps, then resolving. Sometimes the word loss is a face droop that lasts 40 seconds and resolves before anyone calls 911. Sometimes the vertigo is paired with a brief loss of balance that puts the person against a wall for a moment. The mechanism is the same. The vessel briefly occluded. The territory briefly went silent. The territory came back. Whatever the territory governed, hand, foot, word, face, balance, vision, that is what briefly failed and recovered. Anything that fits this pattern, sudden onset, neurological, transient, asymmetric, gets the same response. ER, same day. Note the time. Before I close, the subscribe button is in the usual spot. If you found this useful, the algorithm rewards the small click, and the next person scrolling at midnight, worried about their husband's word loss this afternoon, finds this video instead of finding nothing. If I am wrong about anything in this video, it is most likely the precise length of the warning window. The Johnston data says 48 hours captures roughly half of subsequent strokes. Other datasets push it to 72. Some patients have warnings weeks before. The window is variable. The action is not. The action is the same regardless of the window. ER, same day. Note the time. My grandmother died at 96 in 1994. She lived in Datong her whole life. She watched stroke after stroke in the village across her 7 decades of paying attention, and she lost very few of the people she warned. The ones she did lose were the ones whose families laughed at the kitchen door. Pay attention to Wednesday. The wind moves before the storm. Your grandmother knew. The lab caught up. I will see you in the next breakdown.